November 17th, 1558. A woman lies in a darkened chamber at St. James's Palace. Her abdomen swollen with gallons of fluid, her eyes blind, her organs failing one by one. She is 42 years old. She is the Queen of England, and her body has been trying to kill her since she was 14. What you're about to hear isn't just the story of how Mary Tudor died. It's the story of a lifetime of suffering that medicine couldn't explain and couldn't stop. If you're watching this, you're probably already on Rotten Ages. If you stumbled here by accident, subscribe now. Every week, we dig into the darkest deaths, the buried secrets, and the stories that history textbooks forgot to tell you. For 5 years, Mary Tudor had ruled England with an iron fist and an unshakable faith. 300 Protestants burned to death on her orders. An entire nation watched as she desperately tried and failed to produce an heir. And now, at just 42 years old, her body had betrayed her in ways that would horrify even by the brutal standards of two-day medicine. But to understand the horror of her final days, you need to understand something else first. Mary Tudor spent her entire life dying, not metaphorically, literally. From the age of 14, her body waged war against itself. And what happened in November 1558 was simply the last battle in a war she'd been losing for decades. Picture this. August 1558, 3 months before her death, Mary sits in her chamber at Richmond Palace, her abdomen so swollen she can barely stand. Her ladies whisper to each other, "Surely the Queen is finally pregnant." But Mary knows better. She's felt this swelling before, twice in fact. And both times there was no baby, just humiliation, disappointment, and the crushing realization that God himself seemed to be mocking her. Dr. Thomas Hook, one of her physicians, examines her that morning. He notes the yellowing of her skin, the way her eyes seem to bulge slightly, how her voice has grown rough and deep, but what he writes in his private journal is even more telling. Her Majesty suffers from her old disease, but worse than ever before. Those 3 words would define everything about Mary's death. Let me paint you the scene of England in 1558. Because context matters here, London is dying, not figuratively, literally. An influenza epidemic that started in 1557 has killed approximately 8,000 people in the city alone. The harvests of 1555 and 1556 were disasters, the worst in living memory. People are starving, sick, and desperate. At court, the atmosphere is even more toxic. Everyone knows Mary is dying. And more importantly, everyone knows who's going to replace her. Elizabeth, the Protestant daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman Mary has spent her entire life trying not to acknowledge as her sister. Here's where it gets interesting. In September 1558, Philip II of Spain, Mary's husband, the man she adores with an almost pathetic desperation, is in Brussels. He's been gone since July 1557, over a year. Mary writes to him constantly, begging him to return. His response? Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Back at court, Mary's most trusted advisor, Cardinal Reginald Pole, is also dying. He's been sick since September with what physicians call a Courtan fever, likely malaria. The 2 people who spent 5 years trying to restore Catholicism to England are dying simultaneously, and everyone understands what that means. Their life's work is about to be undone. But let's come back to Mary herself, because her physical deterioration is the darkest heart of this story. Here's what the official court records don't tell you about September 1558. Mary could no longer recognize faces. Jane Dorma, her most loyal lady-in-waiting, later wrote about this in her memoirs, documents not discovered until the 17th century. According to Dorma, Mary would call for people who had been dead for years. But the most heartbreaking detail, Mary kept asking for her husband, Philip, and her ladies were forced to keep lying to her, telling her he was on his way. They couldn't bear to tell their dying queen that Philip had already written her off, literally in letters to his sister Joanna discovered in the Spanish archives centuries later. Philip referred to Mary in the past tense while she was still alive. To understand the medical horror of Mary's final months, we need to talk about what had been happening to her body for decades. Since she was 14, Mary had suffered from what court physicians called her usual troubles. Today, medical historians believe she had severe endometriosis, a condition where tissue similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus. Every month, Mary experienced bleeding so heavy she'd be bedridden for days, pain so severe she'd vomit and lose consciousness. Her physicians tried everything: blood letting from her feet, paratives that left her dehydrated, even tooth extractions because they believed dental problems caused her headaches. Each treatment made her weaker. But by 1554, something else was happening in Mary's body. The pituitary gland, that tiny pea-sized organ at the base of the brain, had likely developed a tumor. Not cancerous, but devastating nonetheless. This tumor, called a prolactinoma, was flooding her system with hormones that convinced her body it was pregnant when it wasn't. Think about the cruelty of that for a moment. Mary desperately needed an heir to secure Catholic England. Her body responded by mimicking pregnancy twice, complete with swollen belly, breast milk production, even the sensation of a baby moving. But there was never a baby, just a tumor pressing against her brain, slowly destroying her from the inside. By spring 1558, new symptoms appeared. Her abdomen swelled again, but this time it was different. The swelling was harder, more painful. Fluid had begun accumulating in her belly, a condition called ascites. Modern oncologists who have studied the historical records agree on one diagnosis: reproductive cancer, likely ovarian, with probable liver metastasis. Every movement sent waves of pain through her abdomen. The fluid buildup pressed against her lungs, making breathing difficult. Her liver, struggling to function, couldn't process toxins properly, leading to confusion and hallucinations. The yellowing of her skin, jaundice, made her appearance shocking even to those accustomed to royal illness. October 1558. Mary has been moved to St. James's Palace, chosen because it's smaller, easier to heat, more comfortable for a dying queen. But comfort is relative when your entire household is disappearing. Here's a detail that doesn't make it into most history books. By late October, Mary's household had shrunk from over 400 members to fewer than 50. Where had everyone gone? Hatfield. They were all at Hatfield, kneeling before Elizabeth and pledging their loyalty while their current queen lay dying. Susan Clarence, Mary's trusted lady of the bedchamber for 20 years, left on October 25th. She told Mary she needed to visit her sick mother. She went straight to Elizabeth. Thomas Cornwallis, Mary's controller, disappeared on November 1st without even making an excuse. Even Dr. Thomas Hewick, her physician, started making trips to Hatfield, though at least he had the decency to return, to tend to Mary. November 10th, 1558, 1 week before Mary's death, Dr. Husk performs what will be his final examination of the Queen. His notes, preserved at the Royal College of Physicians, describe symptoms that would terrify any modern doctor: complete loss of vision in both eyes. Mary is now functionally blind. The tumor, whether pituitary or metastatic, has likely pressed against her optic nerves. She exists in total darkness, unable to see the faces of the few servants who remain. Her fever spikes to dangerous levels, then drops so low her extremities turn blue. This cyclical pattern suggests her body's systems are failing one by one. Her kidneys can barely function. She produces almost no urine despite the massive fluid buildup in her abdomen. But here's the truly disturbing part. Mary is still conscious, still aware, still capable of feeling every moment of agony. Due to medicine has no morphine, no proper pain relief. The best they can offer is wine mixed with herbs that do almost nothing. November 13th, 4 days before death. Jane Dorma sits beside Mary's bed, holding her hand. Mary's eyes, sightless, suddenly focus on something invisible to everyone else. She smiles, the first time anyone has seen her smile in weeks. "Do you see them?" Mary whispers. Jane asks what Her Majesty sees. "The children," Mary replies. "Little children like angels playing and singing. Cardinal Pole, dying at Lambeth Palace across the Thames, was having similar visions. His secretary, Nicholas Harpsfield, recorded that P spoke of seeing a great light and hearing celestial music. The two architects of England's Catholic Restoration seemed to be experiencing the same phenomena as they died. Modern medicine might explain these as hypoxic hallucinations, the brain's response to oxygen deprivation. But for Mary, they were real. They were her children, the ones God had denied her in life, coming to escort her into death. November 15th, 2 days before death, Mary knows the end is near. Despite her blindness and pain, she insists on making her final confession to her chaplain, Father John H.F.M. The confession takes 3 hours, not because Mary has 3 hours worth of sins to confess, but because she keeps losing consciousness mid-sentence. When she's lucid, she gives specific instructions about her funeral. She wants to be buried with her mother, Catherine of Aragon. But here's the tragic irony. Everyone in the room knows none of this will happen. Elizabeth will be queen within days, and Protestant England won't be saying masses for anyone's soul. Mary's final wishes are being recorded by people who already know they'll never be fulfilled. November 16th, 1558. Night falls on St. James's Palace. Mary receives extreme unction. The last rites just before midnight, Father Feckenham anoints her with holy oil, touching her eyes, ears, nose, lips, hands, and feet. Each touch is agony against her hypersensitive skin. Jane Dormer would later describe this scene in heartbreaking detail. The room lit only by candles, their smoke making the already difficult breathing harder still. The sound of Mary's labored breaths growing shallower by the hour. The way Mary's hand would suddenly grip hers with surprising strength, then go completely limp. At 3 a.m. in the morning on November 17th, Father Feckenham begins saying Mass in Mary's chamber. This is unusual. Mass wouldn't typically begin until dawn, but everyone senses that dawn might come too late. November 17th, 1558. Between 4 and 5 in the morning, as Father Feckenham elevates the consecrated host, the most sacred moment of the Catholic Mass, something extraordinary happens. Mary, who hasn't spoken coherently in days, suddenly responds clearly to the Agnus Dei, Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. Her voice is strong and clear, nothing like the tortured whispers of recent days. And then Mary's eyes, those blind eyes that have seen nothing but darkness for weeks, focus on the elevated host. She sees it. Somehow, impossibly, she sees it. A smile spreads across her face, a kind of peaceful smile none of them have seen since before her illness began. And then nothing. No dramatic last words, no death rattle, no final struggle. Mary simply stops breathing. The change is so subtle that for several minutes, nobody realizes what's happened. Jane Dormer continues holding her hand, thinking the Queen has simply fallen asleep. It's only when Dr. Team checks for a pulse that the truth becomes clear. Mary Tudor, Queen of England, is dead. The scene that follows is both practical and deeply symbolic. Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, who has been waiting outside the chamber for this moment, doesn't even wait for official confirmation. He sees Dr. High's face and nose. Without asking permission, he enters the chamber and removes the coronation ring from Mary's still warm hand. Think about the violation of that moment. Mary's body hasn't even begun to cool, and already someone is stripping her of the symbols of her queenship. Throckmorton doesn't close her eyes or say a prayer. He has one job: get that ring to Elizabeth as fast as possible. He's on horseback within minutes, riding hard for Hatfield. The 20-mile journey usually takes 3 hours. Throckmorton makes it in under 2, killing 1 horse in the process. What happens to Mary's body over the next few hours would horrify modern sensibilities, but was standard practice for Tudor royalty. The corpse is immediately stripped and washed. Her ladies, those who didn't abandon her, perform this duty. Then come the embalmer. Mary's chest is cut open, her organs removed. Her heart, liver, and intestines are placed in separate containers to be buried separately, a practice meant to confuse evil spirits who might disturb the royal remains. The body cavity is filled with spices and preservatives. But here's a gruesome detail recorded by the embalmer. Mary's abdomen contains nearly 2 gallons of fluid. When they drain it, they also discover something else. Masses of abnormal tissue, almost certainly tumors, throughout her reproductive organs. One embalmer, William Harvey, privately notes that he's never seen anything like it in 30 years of practice. The body is then wrapped in surloth waxed fabric, designed to aid preservation and placed in a lead coffin. But Mary won't be buried for another month. First, she must lie in state, allowing her subjects to pay their respects to a queen many of them feared and few of them loved. At Hatfield House, Elizabeth is sitting under an oak tree reading, or at least that's the scene she has carefully staged. When Throckmorton arrives and presents the ring, Elizabeth falls to her knees. She has been preparing for this moment for 5 years. Elizabeth's first order regarding Mary is surprisingly respectful. She commands that Mary receive a funeral befitting a Queen of England. No expense is to be spared. It's either genuine respect for her half-sister or brilliant political theater. Probably both. The chapel is draped in black cloth. Hundreds of candles burn day and night. So many that the smoke stains the ceiling black. You can still see the marks today. Guards stand watching shifts, and an endless procession of nobles, clergy, and common people file past. But here's what's telling. The common people come in greater numbers than anyone expected. Whatever they thought of Bloody Mary, she was their queen. And many remembered the young princess who had been so cruelly treated by her father. A funeral effigy is created, a lifelike representation of Mary that will ride atop her coffin during the funeral procession. The artist's work from death masks and measurements taken directly from the corpse. When modern historians examine this effigy in the 20th century, they notice something significant. The pronounced swelling of the abdomen is clearly visible. The artists made no attempt to hide it or make Mary look more normal. They preserved the evidence of her final suffering. December 13th, 1558. London wakes to the tolling of bells. The funeral procession begins at St. James's Palace. The coffin, draped in purple velvet and cloth of gold, is placed on a chariot pulled by 4 black horses. Next come the heralds bearing the symbols of Mary's sovereignty: her coat of arms, her helmet, her sword, her shield. Each item will be ceremonially broken and thrown into a grave, signifying that her reign is truly over. Then comes the coffin itself, with the eerily lie-like effigy resting on top. The effigy is dressed in crimson velvet, wearing a crown and holding the scepter and orb. Its painted eyes stare sightlessly at the London sky, a disturbing echo of Mary's blindness in her final days. The procession moves slowly through London streets. The route is lined with people, some weeping, some silent, some openly celebrating. One chronicler notes that he heard someone shout, "The witch is dead," before being quickly silenced by guards. Bishop John White of Winchester delivers the funeral sermon. His words are carefully chosen, walking a tight rope between honoring the dead queen and not offending the new one. But then he makes a remarkable statement. She was a king's daughter. She was a king's sister. She was a king's wife. She was a queen. And by the same title, a king also. That final phrase, "a king also," is White's way of defending Mary's right to rule in her own name, not merely as someone's wife. It's a surprisingly feminist statement for 1558, and Elizabeth, watching from her hidden gallery, reportedly nods in approval. The ceremony continues for 3 hours. Prayers are said, hymns are sung, and finally it's time for the burial. Mary's coffin is carried to a vault in the north aisle of Henry VI's chapel. This isn't where she wanted to be. She wanted to be buried with her mother at Peterborough, but it's where she'll remain. As the coffin is lowered into the vault, Mary's household officers perform their final duty. They break their white staves of office and throw the pieces into the grave. It's a powerful symbol. Their service to Mary has ended forever. But here's where history turns ironic. Mary is buried alone in that vault without monument or inscription, just stones marking the spot. The woman who had so desperately wanted to be remembered to leave a Catholic legacy is essentially erased. 45 years later, when Elizabeth dies in 6003, King James I makes a decision that would have horrified both sisters. He orders Elizabeth's coffin placed in the same vault as Mary's, not beside it, but on top of it. Elizabeth, even in death, literally, overshadows her half-sister. James then commissions a magnificent white marble monument, but it bears only Elizabeth's effigy. Mary isn't even mentioned in the original inscription, as if she never existed. Only in the 18th century does someone add a small Latin inscription, partners in throne and grave, here we sleep. Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in hope of resurrection. In Brussels, Philip II receives news of Mary's death on November 20th, 3 days after it happened. His reaction, recorded by his secretary, is chilling in its coldness. His Majesty received the news with appropriate gravity, retiring to his chapel for an hour of prayer. An hour. That's all the mourning Philip allows himself for the wife who adored him, who waited for him, who died calling his name, writing later to his sister Joanna. Philip is even more candid. I feel a reasonable regret for her death. He isn't done calculating. Within days, he's instructing his ambassadors to propose marriage to Elizabeth. The same man who couldn't be bothered to visit his dying wife now wants to marry her successor. Elizabeth, to her credit, keeps him dangling for months before rejecting him with exquisite politeness. In the weeks following Mary's death, her physicians compare notes trying to understand what had killed their queen. Dr. Hewick, Dr. Owen, and Dr. Caesar compile their observations. Their conclusions, written in Latin and preserved in medical archives, paint a horrifying picture. They described morbid growths throughout Mary's reproductive organs. The liver was greatly enlarged and diseased. The accumulation of fluid in her abdomen was beyond what nature could bear. One physician notes that the pituitary gland on examination appeared unusually large and misshapen. What they're describing in 16th century medical terminology sounds remarkably like metastatic ovarian cancer with liver involvement and a pituitary tumor. The combination of conditions would have caused unimaginable suffering, constant pain, hormonal chaos, cognitive impairment, and the slow failure of multiple organ systems. But here's what makes Mary's case medically fascinating, even today.